What would you do if you lost everything in a single night, and the one person you believed would never turn you away quietly closed the door on you? I lost my business, I lost my house, and my own son told me I could not stay. Would you beg to be let in, or would you walk away with what little dignity you had left? This story is not about money. It is about the value of a man when he has nothing. For 35 years, my life followed the same rhythm. I woke before the sun, long before most people had even rolled over in their beds. The alarm clock was rarely needed. My body had learned the schedule on its own. Coffee first, always black, always hot. Then my boots, heavy, worn, and shaped by decades of standing on concrete and dirt. I would lace them up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my fingers, the kind of stiffness that comes from a lifetime of honest labor. Miller and Sons Construction started as nothing more than an idea and a second-hand pickup truck. No investors, no shortcuts, just my hands, my word, and the promise I made to myself that I would build something solid, something that would last. Not just buildings, a reputation, a name my son could be proud of. In the early years, I did everything myself. I hauled lumber, I poured concrete, I swept floors at the end of 12-hour days. My hands were always rough, cracked from cement dust and cold air. The smell of fresh-cut wood and wet cement followed me everywhere. Even at home, Eleanor used to laugh and say I smelled like work. I took it as a compliment. There was a quiet pride in building something that people trusted. Homeowners would shake my hand and say, "Robert, you do honest work." Those words mattered more than money ever did. I wasn't rich, not by anyone's definition, but I was secure. I paid my taxes. I paid my workers fairly. I never missed a mortgage payment. And I raised my son in a house that was built on effort, not shortcuts. Daniel grew up watching me leave before dawn and come home after dark. When he was small, he used to follow me around the job site, wearing a tiny plastic hard hat I bought him at a hardware store. He would hold a tape measure like it was treasure. Those moments were worth every sore muscle and every sleepless night. By my late 50s, the company was stable. We weren't a giant corporation, but we had contracts, steady employees, and a reputation that kept our schedule full. I thought I'd done everything right, planned responsibly, saved carefully, protected my family. Then everything collapsed. It started with a lawsuit, one project, one problem that no one had predicted. The soil beneath a new foundation shifted months after completion. Cracks appeared. The homeowners panicked. Engineers were called. Lawyers followed. They claimed negligence. They wanted millions. I trusted my insurance company. After all, I had paid premiums faithfully for decades. When I filed the claim, I believed foolishly that this was exactly what insurance was for. But they found a technicality, some clause buried deep in fine print, some wording that shifted responsibility away from them and directly onto me. They denied coverage. I still remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the letter. My hands shook so badly I had to put the paper down. 35 years of doing things the right way, and one paragraph of legal language was enough to erase it all. The lawsuit drained everything. Legal fees, settlements, lost contracts as clients grew nervous. Banks pulled their support. Credit lines vanished overnight. Vendors demanded immediate payment. Employees, the men who trusted me to keep the company alive, had to be laid off one by one. That was the hardest part. Looking them in the eye and telling them I could no longer protect their livelihoods. Within weeks, Miller and Sons Construction
was no more. The bank came next. They were polite,
professional, cold. They spoke in numbers, not memories. They didn't care that Eleanor and I had raised our son in that house. They didn't care that every corner of it carried our life in its walls. To them, it was collateral, nothing more. When I packed my belongings, I moved slowly. Each item felt heavier than it should have, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Photo albums, tools I had owned for decades, Eleanor's old scarves. The smell of our home still lingered in the air, and I wondered how something that had once felt permanent could be reduced to cardboard boxes so easily. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. No one said much. They didn't know what to say. I didn't either. That night I sat alone on the steps of what used to be my house. The porch light was still on. I hadn't turned it off yet. For a moment, I thought about leaving it on forever, like a small rebellion against reality. But I reached up and switched it off. Darkness settled in quietly. In my car, I gripped the steering wheel and asked myself the questions no man ever wants to face. What did I do wrong? Where did I fail? Was I careless? Or was I simply unlucky in a world that no longer had patience for men who built things slowly and honestly? I had spent my life believing that effort equaled security, that integrity protected you, that if you showed up every day and did your best, life would meet you halfway. Sitting there, homeless at 62, those beliefs felt fragile. Maybe I wasn't wrong. Maybe the world had just changed faster than I could keep up. The hardest part was not losing the business. It was losing the identity that came with it. I had been Robert Miller, builder, provider, father who stood on solid ground. Without that, who was I? There was one place left that still felt safe in my mind. My son's house. Daniel had done well for himself. A good job, a nice home in the suburbs. Every parent dreams of seeing their child succeed. I told myself that asking for a few days was not weakness. It was family. It was what families were supposed to do when one of their own was drowning. I didn't need much. Just a couch, just time to breathe, just space to figure out what came next. As I drove, I rehearsed my words. I would keep it simple. I would not burden him. I would not stay long. I would make myself small, independent, invisible if necessary, because pride had already been taken from me. I wasn't about to lose my dignity, too. And as the streetlights passed overhead, one by one, I held on to the only thought that still gave me comfort. I had one place left to go, my son's house. I believed that a father's place in his child's home was still sacred. I believed that no matter how far I had fallen, I would not fall alone. I was about to learn how fragile that belief truly was. Daniel's house sat at the end of a quiet suburban street, the kind where every lawn was trimmed evenly and every driveway looked like it had been swept that morning. As I pulled up, I noticed how clean everything looked. White siding, fresh paint, a porch light that glowed warmly even though it was still daylight. It was a good house, a successful house. The kind of house a father dreams his son will one day own. I sat in my car for a moment before getting out, not because I was unsure, but because I needed to steady myself. My clothes were clean, but they were old. My shoes had seen better years. I suddenly felt like I was bringing the dust of my collapse into a place that had never known failure. I picked up my small suitcase. Everything I still owned that mattered fit inside it. When Daniel opened the door, his face showed surprise mixed with relief. He smiled, the same smile he had worn since childhood, though it seemed less confident now, less certain. "David, I didn't expect you so soon," he said. "I know," I replied softly. "Plans change." The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something sweet baking in the kitchen. It smelled like order, like control, like a life that had not yet cracked. Emily appeared behind him, her posture straight, her smile polite but restrained. She was always well put together. Perfect hair, perfect clothes. Everything about her said discipline and distance. "Robert," she said, nodding, "I'm sorry to hear about everything." Her voice was gentle, her words were kind, but something in her eyes was already closing. "I was hoping," I began, shifting the suitcase in my hand, "that I might stay here for a couple of days, just until I figure out my next step. I won't be any trouble. I barely take up space." Daniel glanced at Emily, just for a second, but it was enough. She folded her hands together, like someone preparing to deliver unfortunate news. "It's just that," she said carefully, "we weren't expecting company, and with our schedules, things are a bit tight." Tight. Such a clean word for refusal. "We really value our routine," she continued, "and our space. You understand." Daniel looked at the floor, then at me, then back at Emily. Maybe there's a hotel nearby," he said. "Something temporary." I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "I checked," I said. "Most places are expensive, and I don't have much left." Emily's smile softened, but only slightly. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," she said. "You always do." It was meant to sound encouraging. Instead, it felt like a dismissal. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "It's not that we don't care, Dad. We just need to think practically." Practically. Another word that sounded reasonable while hiding something colder underneath. I stood there holding my suitcase, feeling like a guest who had overstayed his welcome before even being invited in. "I understand," I said quietly, and in that moment, I realized something painful. They were not refusing to help me because they could not. They were refusing because they did not want the disruption. My need was inconvenient. Emily stepped forward slightly. "Once things settle for you, we'd love to have you over for dinner sometime." Sometime. When my presence could be scheduled, contained. Daniel hugged me briefly. It was awkward, hesitant. The embrace of a man who wanted to be kind but didn't want conflict more. "Take care of yourself, Dad," he said. I walked back to my car as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The air felt heavier. The neighborhood remained peaceful, unaware that something sacred had just been broken inside me. I sat behind the steering wheel, staring at the house I had once helped him believe he could own someday. I remembered Daniel as a boy, asking me if he would ever have a place like this. I had told him, "If you work hard and stay honest, you can build anything." He had done his part, I had done mine, and yet, here I was. As I started the engine, the truth settled in slowly and painfully. I was not homeless because I had failed financially. I was homeless because I had failed to remain convenient. As I drove away, the sun disappeared behind the rooftops, leaving the street wrapped in a soft orange glow. It felt symbolic, like a chapter closing without ceremony. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, from realization. Had I raised a son who was too gentle? Or had I raised one who had learned too well how to avoid discomfort? Had I sacrificed too much of myself, leaving him without the strength to stand for what was right? The questions echoed in my mind, unanswered. I drove until the houses thinned and the stores grew brighter.
Neon signs, gas stations, the places where no one asked questions. I had nowhere left to go.
And for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. With nowhere to turn and night falling fast, I parked where no one would notice me, unaware that before morning came, a single phone call would change everything I thought I knew about my life. I drove until the streets stopped looking like neighborhoods and started looking like places people passed through but never stayed. Gas stations, fast food signs glowing in the dark, a Walmart parking lot stretched wide and anonymous, filled with trucks, a few RVs, and scattered cars whose owners probably had nowhere better to be either. I parked near the far edge, away from the lights. It felt safer there, less noticeable. My car went silent when I turned the engine off, and the cold rushed in almost immediately. The late autumn air pressed against the windows, like it was trying to remind me how thin my protection really was. I leaned my seat back as far as it would go. It wasn't designed for sleeping. It was designed for commuting, for returning to a place that felt like home. That realization stung more than the cold. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself and stared at the ceiling. The fabric smelled faintly of sawdust and old oil, the scent of a life that had slipped away too fast for me to understand. My breath fogged the glass. Each exhale felt heavier than the last. A semi-truck roared past on the nearby highway, its sound deep and endless. The ground vibrated slightly, then returned to stillness. The world kept moving. I was the one who had stopped. I checked my wallet out of habit. $23 and some loose change. Enough for coffee in the morning. Enough to pretend for a few hours that I was still part of ordinary life. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed the evening at Daniel's house. Emily's careful words. Daniel's hesitation. The way he avoided meeting my eyes. I hadn't asked for much. Just a couch. Just a pause. And yet, that had been too much. I wondered when being a father had stopped meaning shelter. The temperature dropped further as the night deepened. I shifted in my seat, trying to find warmth. My knees ached. My shoulders burned with tension I couldn't release. I felt small, not physically, but spiritually. Like a man who had lost the right to take up space. For the first time, a frightening thought entered my mind. What if this was permanent? What if I had crossed a line where recovery was no longer guaranteed? A soft knock of fear settled into my chest, but I pushed it away. Fear was a luxury. Survival was not. Sometime after midnight, my phone vibrated. The sound startled me so badly I nearly dropped it. No one called me anymore. Not clients, not coworkers, not family. Unknown number. I hesitated. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring. Whoever it was, they couldn't possibly be bringing good news. But something in me needed to hear a human voice. "Hello?" I said quietly. "Mr. Robert Miller?" The voice was calm, formal, and composed. "Yes. My name is Henry Cole. I'm calling on behalf of my employer, Mr. Thomas Whitmore." The name meant nothing to me. "Mr. Whitmore would like to request a meeting with you tomorrow morning," he continued. "It is rather urgent." I straightened in my seat. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I don't know anyone by that name." There was a brief pause, as though he were checking something. "Robert Miller, age 62, founder of Miller & Sons Construction, born March 21st. Does that sound correct?" My stomach tightened. "Yes, but how do you—" "Mr. Whitmore is prepared to compensate you for your time.
$500 for 1 hour. $500. The number echoed in my head like a foreign language. That was more than I had seen in weeks, more than I had expected to hold again anytime soon. For what? I asked. I'm afraid I cannot discuss that over the phone, Henry replied.
But I can assure you that your presence is important to Mr. Whitmore. I looked around my dark car, the fogged windows, the empty lot, the silence. Where would this meeting take place? I asked. At the Whitmore estate, just outside Cincinnati. Transportation is not required. You may arrive on your own. The address will be sent to your phone. A part of me felt suspicious. Another part felt desperate. And a third part, the quiet one, felt something I had not felt in days. Curiosity. I had nothing to lose. No schedule, no obligations, no place to be. I'll come, I said. Thank you, Mr. Miller. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long time after the call ended. It felt unreal, like something that happened in someone else's life. $500 for an hour. For the first time since everything had collapsed, I felt a thin thread of possibility stretch across my fear. Not hope, not yet, just uncertainty. And uncertainty was better than despair. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. Who was Thomas Whitmore? And why did a man like that want to see me? As I finally drifted into a restless sleep, one question followed me into the darkness. What kind of man reaches into the life of a stranger? And why had he chosen me? The address Henry sent led me far beyond the neighborhoods I was used to. The road narrowed first, then widened again, curving through tall trees and manicured hedges that looked like they had never known neglect. Every mile I drove, the world felt more distant from the one I had just left behind. My car, dusty and tired, seemed out of place among the long driveways and iron gates that guarded homes built on wealth so old it no longer needed to announce itself. When I reached the Whitmore estate, I had to stop and take a breath. The gate alone looked like something out of a history book. Heavy black iron, tall enough to discourage curiosity, decorated with subtle gold accents that caught the morning light. Cameras were placed with quiet confidence, not to intimidate, but to remind you that nothing happened here by accident. A voice came through the intercom before I could even press the button. "Mr. Miller, please proceed." The gates opened slowly, silently, like they had all the time in the world. The driveway stretched ahead like a private road, lined with trees whose branches met overhead. The tires of my car sounded too loud on the gravel, too crude for a place that seemed to exist in permanent calm. At the end stood the house, not a mansion in the flashy sense, but a residence that carried authority. Stone walls, wide windows, and a structure that suggested permanence rather than display. I parked between two cars that cost more than my old house ever had. Henry Cole met me at the door. He looked exactly how his voice had sounded, composed, precise, and calm. His suit was flawless, his posture upright, his expression respectful without being warm. "Mr. Miller," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Whitmore is waiting." Inside, everything spoke of control and intention. The floors shined without looking polished. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and something floral I could not name. Art lined the walls, not flashy pieces, but paintings that carried weight and age. The silence was not empty. It was full of order. Henry led me down a hallway that felt longer than necessary, perhaps designed to prepare visitors for what waited ahead. At the end was a set of double doors. He knocked once, then opened them. Thomas Whitmore sat near a large window overlooking a garden that looked more like a park. He was thinner than I expected, his body framed by a chair that was both comfortable and medical in nature. Tubes were absent, but his breathing carried effort. His hair was white, neatly combed, and his eyes were sharp in a way that did not match the weakness of his body. "Robert Miller," he said. His voice was soft, but not weak. "You look exactly the same." I frowned slightly. "I'm afraid we've never met." He smiled. Not a large smile, just enough to suggest memory. "Sit, please." I did as I was told, unsure why my hands felt slightly unsteady. "You're probably wondering why you're here," he said. "Yes," I answered simply. He studied me for a moment, like a man confirming something he already knew. "Tell me, Robert, do you remember a stormy night 8 years ago on Route 47? The room felt suddenly smaller. "I drive a lot of roads," I said cautiously. "There was heavy rain," he continued. "Late fall, cold, visibility nearly gone. A black sedan went off the road near a bend by Hollow Creek." My breath caught. The memory surfaced before I could stop it. "I was there," I said quietly. "Yes," Thomas replied. "You were." The images returned with painful clarity. The rain pounding against my windshield, the sudden flash of headlights sliding sideways, the violent sound of metal scraping against guardrail. The moment of shock when I realized a car had gone over the edge. I almost kept driving, I admitted. Not because I didn't care, because I was scared. Thomas nodded slowly. "And yet you stopped." I remembered pulling over, heart pounding, stepping into rain that soaked through my jacket in seconds. The slope down to the creek was steep and muddy, dangerous. Everything in my body had screamed to stay put, to call for help and wait. But something else had spoken louder. "You climbed down," Thomas said. "Most people wouldn't." I remembered slipping twice, mud in my boots, my hands scraping against rock and wet leaves, the sound of water rushing. The car upside down, half submerged, headlights still on, pointing into the darkness like helpless eyes. "I didn't think," I said. "I just moved." The window had shattered under the force of a stone I found near the creek. My hands were cut, but adrenaline made it irrelevant. Inside the car, a man lay unconscious, blood on his forehead, his breathing shallow. "You pulled me out," Thomas said softly. "You dragged me through freezing water and up a slope that nearly broke your back." I had forgotten the pain until he reminded me. The weight of his body, the struggle to keep him upright. The moment I wondered if I was strong enough. The moment I decided I had no choice. "You gave me your jacket," he continued. "You were shaking, but you wrapped me in it anyway." I swallowed. Anyone would have done the same. Thomas shook his head. "No, they wouldn't." He turned his gaze toward the window. 3 cars passed before you stopped. 3. The silence between us deepened. "I waited 8 years," he said, "to thank you properly." I stared at him, unable to speak. "You saved my life, Robert. And you did it without asking who I was, without knowing what I owned, without caring if I mattered to the world." I felt something tighten in my chest. If I had been afraid that night, Thomas continued, everything would have ended. My family, my business, my chance to make things right. I lowered my eyes. I just did what was necessary. "And that," he said gently, "is exactly why I called you."
The room felt charged with something I couldn't yet understand. I looked at him. Why wait so long? He hesitated. Because gratitude is easy. Facing what it means, that takes time. I thought of that night often, but never as something extraordinary. It was simply a moment when fear had lost to responsibility. I never imagined it had shaped another man's entire future. If I had hesitated, I whispered, you wouldn't be here. And if you had been afraid, he replied, I wouldn't have lived. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding mine. I have been waiting 8 years to say thank you, Robert.
The weight of his words pressed against me. Gratitude from a stranger is rare. Gratitude this deep is almost unheard of. And yet, something told me that gratitude was only the beginning. As Thomas Whitmore looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and resolve, I sensed that his story was not finished, and whatever he was about to say would change the direction of my life forever. Thomas Whitmore leaned back slightly in his chair, as if the weight of memory had finally been set down. His breathing was shallow but steady. I noticed for the first time how thin his hands looked resting on the armrests. Not fragile, but worn, like a man who had spent his life holding responsibility too tightly. Robert, he said, there is something you need to understand before I go any further. I nodded, unsure of what he could possibly mean. When you pulled me from that creek, he continued, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a second chance to become a man I had avoided being. I shifted in my seat. Praise made me uncomfortable. Gratitude made me uneasy. I had never done good things to be recognized for them. You're giving it too much meaning, I said quietly. It was one moment. One moment, he repeated, can rewrite an entire life. He reached toward a folder resting on the small table beside him. Henry stepped forward and placed it in Thomas's hands with care, as though it contained something sacred. This, Thomas said, tapping the folder, is my will. The word hit me like a sudden gust of cold air. I don't think I should be hearing this, I replied immediately. That's family business. I'm just a stranger who happened to be there. You are not a stranger, Thomas said firmly, and that is exactly why you are here. He opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents filled with legal language I didn't understand. Pages neatly stacked, signatures, stamps. I have made a decision, he said, one that my lawyers have already executed. A quiet tension filled the room. As of last week, Thomas continued, you are the sole beneficiary of my estate. The words did not make sense at first. They floated in the air between us, meaningless, like a sentence spoken in another language. I'm sorry, I said. I think you misspoke. He met my eyes without hesitation. I did not. My heart began to pound. You have a family, children, a legacy. I have children, he replied, but legacy is something else entirely. I stood up abruptly. I can't accept that. Whatever you're offering, it's too much. I don't even know you. You know who I am, he said. I am the man who would be dead without you. That doesn't mean it means everything, he interrupted gently. I paced the room. My mind raced. This was absurd, unreal, a cruel misunderstanding. You're talking about houses, businesses, money beyond imagination, I said. I don't belong in that world. Thomas's gaze softened. That is precisely why you do. He gestured toward the window, where the manicured gardens stretched endlessly. I built an empire, he said. Factories, real estate, investments. influence. And yet, in all of it, I had never met a man who helped me without asking who I was. I shook my head. You can't fix gratitude with money. No, he said, but you can honor it with responsibility. I felt dizzy. This feels like a mistake. It is a correction, Thomas replied. My chest tightened. Why me? I whispered. Because you acted without calculation, he said. And I have lived my entire life surrounded by people who calculate everything. I sat back down slowly, my legs no longer steady. I don't want power, I said. I don't want wealth. I don't want to become something I don't recognize. Thomas studied me with deep intensity. Do you know why I trust you with this? He asked. I didn't answer. Because a man who does not want power is the only one who can be trusted with it. The room fell silent again. I am dying, Robert, he continued calmly. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors have given me weeks, perhaps months. I have settled my debts, legal, financial, and moral. I closed my eyes. This, he said, tapping the folder again, is my moral debt. I looked at him, feeling both honored and terrified. You are asking me to carry something I never asked for, I said. And I am asking you to be the man you already are, he replied. I ran my hands through my hair. What about your children? Thomas's expression darkened slightly. They have had their inheritance their entire lives, he said. Money without accountability, privilege without gratitude. What they lack is not wealth, it is character. That's harsh, I said. It is honest, he replied. I struggled to find my breath. This is not how things are done. Perhaps that is why things are broken, he said quietly. I looked at the papers again, pages filled with authority. Decisions that would outlive us both. You're changing my life without my permission, I said. Thomas nodded. You changed mine without asking. The comparison silenced me. I stood still, caught between two worlds, the one I had known, the one being placed in my hands. This is too much, I murmured. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion in his body. I am not offering you a gift, he said. I am returning something I borrowed. Time, breath, tomorrow. My voice shook. I don't deserve this. No, he said gently. You earned it in the only way that matters. I sank into the chair, overwhelmed. The irony was almost unbearable. Yesterday, I had been counting dollars in my car. Today, a dying billionaire was asking me to inherit a lifetime. Life had no mercy for balance. It swung from one extreme to another without warning. I stared at Thomas, finally understanding something deeper. This was not about money. This was about judgment, about who deserved to hold influence when power changed hands. I need time, I said. You have it, Thomas replied, but the paperwork does not wait. When I am gone, this will be yours. I swallowed hard. And there is something else, he added. I looked up. Something you deserve to know before you make any decisions about your future. His tone shifted, more serious, more careful. What is it? I asked. Thomas paused, then said quietly, but that is not the part that will hurt you most. As Thomas's words settled into my chest, I sensed that the fortune he had placed before me was not the heaviest burden I would carry. The truth he was about to reveal would weigh far more than any inheritance ever could.
Thomas looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. The silence felt heavier than any words. It was not the kind of pause meant to create drama. It was the kind that existed because the truth, once spoken, could never be taken back. "Robert," he said quietly, "what I'm about to show you is not meant to punish you.
It is meant to protect you." Henry stepped forward and placed a slim black folder on the table between us. It looked ordinary, too ordinary to carry the weight I was about to feel. Inside were several documents and a small digital recorder. My stomach tightened. "I had a private investigator follow up on your life over the years," Thomas said gently. "Not to control it, only to understand the man who saved me. I wanted to know if you were well, if you were safe, if you ever needed help." I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. "The most recent report," he continued, "came in 2 weeks ago." Henry opened the folder and laid out a few pages. I recognized the heading immediately. Credit reports, bank statements, mortgage records. "They are behind 3 months on their mortgage," Thomas said. "Their credit card debt exceeds $40,000, most of it in Emily's name." I stared at the paper. Daniel never mentioned any of this. "He wouldn't," Thomas replied. "Because this is not about inability. It is about image." My chest tightened. Henry pressed a button on the recorder. Emily's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "Your father always finds a way to make things complicated," she said. "If he stays here, he'll never leave. We'll be stuck taking care of him forever." Daniel's voice followed, hesitant. "He's my dad." "Yes," Emily replied. "And you're my husband. You can't save everyone." The recording stopped. My heart pounded in my ears. Henry pressed play again. "What if he really has nowhere else to go?" Daniel asked. "That's not our responsibility," Emily said. "We have our own future to protect." I closed my eyes. They weren't worried about money. They were worried about inconvenience. Another file slid across the table. A transcript. Henry pointed to a highlighted line. "If we let him stay," Emily had said, "he'll start expecting things." "And what happens when we have kids? Do you want your father living on our couch when we're trying to build a real life?" A real life. I swallowed hard. "They weren't struggling," Thomas said softly. "They were choosing comfort over compassion." My hands trembled. "They let me believe they had no room," I whispered. "But they had no will." The realization cut deeper than any rejection. For days I had told myself they were overwhelmed, that they simply couldn't help, that my timing was wrong. But now the truth stood naked in front of me. They did not help because they did not want to, not because they were poor, but because they were protecting their lifestyle. I leaned back in the chair, suddenly exhausted. "Did I fail him?" I asked quietly. "My son?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. Every parent asks that question when their child disappoints them, he finally said. But failure is not the same as difference. You raised a man who learned how to survive. You did not raise a man who learned how to sacrifice. That sentence pierced me. I had taught Daniel how to build, how to work, how to stand tall. But had I taught him how to kneel beside another person's pain? My throat tightened. I spent my life protecting him, I whispered. And when I needed protection, he chose comfort. Thomas nodded slowly. That is why you must be careful now. Money will change the shape of their behavior. It will not change the nature of it. I stared at the documents again, the recordings, the numbers.
The truth. I wasn't angry. I was grieving. Grieving the son I believed I had. Grieving the family I thought still existed. Henry collected the papers silently. "You deserve honesty," Thomas said, "before you decide who to trust." I nodded, unable to speak. And then my phone vibrated in my pocket, once, then again. I looked down at the screen. Daniel. As Daniel's name glowed on my screen, I realized that the truth had arrived just in time.
Now I would see whether love was stronger than guilt, and whether sincerity could survive the presence of money. The phone kept vibrating in my hand. Daniel's name glowed on the screen like a question that already knew its own answer. I took a slow breath before answering. "Hello, Daniel." "Dad." His voice was different, softer, lighter, almost nervous. "I just heard about Thomas Whitmore, about the will." So the news had already traveled. It always did when money was involved. "Yes," I said. "It's true." There was a pause, then a small laugh. "Wow. I mean, that's unbelievable. You must still be in shock." I almost smiled at the irony. Shock had nothing to do with it anymore. Clarity did. "Dad, listen," he said quickly. "I've been thinking about the other night, about how things went at the house. I feel terrible." That was fast, too fast. "You were under a lot of stress," he continued. "Emily and I both were. We didn't handle it well. I should have stood up for you more." I closed my eyes. "I wasn't asking you to stand up for me," I said calmly. "I was asking for a place to rest." "Yes, I know. And I failed you." His voice grew more emotional. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I really am." For a moment, the father in me wanted to accept it, to wrap the words around my heart and pretend they were enough. But the man I was becoming needed something else. Truth. "What changed, Daniel?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "What do you mean?" "What changed between the night you couldn't find space for me and today when you're calling to apologize?" Silence stretched between us. "Well, things are different now," he said carefully. "How so?" "I just mean, you're not in the same situation anymore. You're secure, stable." There it was. Not love, not remorse. Security. "Dad, we'd love for you to come over for dinner," he added quickly. "Emily wants to apologize too. We want to start fresh, as a family." I pictured Emily's recorded voice, calm, calculated, talking about real life and inconvenience. "Dinner," I repeated. "Yes, tonight if you can, or tomorrow, whatever works for you." I felt no anger, only a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. Money had not changed their hearts. It had only revealed their priorities. "Dinner sounds fine," I said after a moment. Relief flooded his voice. "That's great, Dad. Really great. We'll make something special." Special. Not sincere, not honest. Special. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The truth was simple. When I was homeless, I was a burden. When I was wealthy, I became an opportunity. The shift was not subtle. It was immediate. And it was terrifying in its clarity. But it also gave me something powerful. Choice. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to be accepted. I was deciding what acceptance even meant. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had built houses, that had pulled a stranger from a creek, that had raised a son. They had not changed. Only the world around them had. And tomorrow, at that dinner table, I would finally understand how deep that difference truly went. As I agreed to that dinner, I knew it would not be a celebration. It would be a mirror, one that would show us all exactly who we had become when money stood between love and truth. The house looked different that night. Not larger, not richer, just more prepared. Every light was on. The porch had been swept clean. A candle flickered inside the front window like a silent announcement, "We are ready for you now." Daniel opened the door before I could knock. "Dad," he said brightly, stepping forward for a hug. It was warm, too warm, like a performance that had been rehearsed. Inside, the table was set with their best dishes, crystal glasses, linen napkins, the kind of dinner they had never made when I was just passing by. Emily appeared from the kitchen, wearing a soft smile and a dress I didn't recognize.
"Walter, we're so glad you came," she said gently, as if we had always been close. Glad. Not sorry. Not ashamed. Glad. Dinner began with small talk. Weather, work, the neighborhood. Everything except the truth that sat between us like a fourth guest at the table. Daniel poured wine for all of us. "Dad, we've been talking a lot about family lately," he said, "about how important it is to stay connected." Emily nodded. "Life moves so fast, we forget what really matters." I watched them carefully. Their words were smooth, perfectly shaped, but they had no weight. "Family matters," I said quietly, "when it's convenient." They both paused for a fraction of a second. Emily recovered first. "We were scared," she said. "That night you came over, we were overwhelmed. We didn't think clearly." "Scared of what?" I asked. She hesitated. "Of change." I nodded slowly. "No, you were afraid of responsibility." Silence stretched across the table. Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad, we never meant to make you feel unwanted."
"But you did," I said calmly. "And that truth deserves respect." Emily's eyes softened.
"We just didn't know how to help."
"You knew," I replied. "You just chose not to." The air thickened. I reached into my jacket and placed 2 envelopes on the table. Daniel frowned. "What's that?" "Open them." Inside each was a cashier's check. $25,000. Daniel's eyes widened. "Dad, what is this?" "Relief," I said. "For your mortgage, your credit cards, your fear of instability." Emily stared at the check like it was salvation.
"You knew," she whispered, "about our finances."
"Yes," I said, "before you ever apologized." Daniel swallowed hard. "So this is help?" "No," I replied gently. "This is closure." Emily looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I am not your emergency plan," I said, "and I am not your investment." Daniel's voice trembled. "But we're family." "Family doesn't calculate value based on inheritance," I said. "Family shows up when it costs something." I stood slowly. "This money is not a gift," I continued. "It's a boundary. Use it to stabilize your lives, not to control mine." Emily's voice cracked. "You're leaving?" "Yes." Daniel stepped forward. "Dad, please, don't do this. We can fix things." "You can," I said softly. "Just not with me." I walked toward the door. Behind me, no one spoke. Not because they had nothing to say, but because the truth had already said everything.
I did not drive far that night, not because I was lost, but because, for the first time in weeks, I finally knew where I was not going. I was not going back to beg. I was not going to prove anything. And I was not going to let bitterness decide who I became next. I parked near a quiet overlook outside the city, the kind of place where people stop to watch the sunset, not to run from their past. I turned off the engine and sat there in silence. No anger, no trembling.
Just a strange calm, like the end of a long storm. I thought about revenge, not in violent ways, but in the small, human ways. Refusing to answer calls, withholding forgiveness, letting pride turn into punishment. And then I let those thoughts go. Revenge would have kept me tied to the very pain I was trying to leave behind. It would have made Daniel and Emily still the center of my life, even in absence. I did not want that power dynamic anymore. I whispered to myself, freedom begins when you stop trying to make people feel what you felt. I had given them the check not to prove superiority, but to release myself from expectation, from obligation, from emotional bargaining. I was done negotiating my worth. That night, I wrote down 3 simple rules on a napkin from my glove compartment. 1. I will not chase those who chose distance. 2. I will not punish myself for loving too deeply. 3. I will build a life that feels honest, even if it looks smaller. Smaller had once meant failure to me. Now it meant peace. I was not cutting my son out of my life. I was simply stepping out of a story where I had to beg for belonging. I sent Daniel one message. I love you. I always will. But I am choosing a life built on mutual respect, not obligation. When you are ready for that, I'll be here. No anger, no accusation, just truth. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. For the first time since losing my company, my home, and my certainty, I did not feel like a man without direction. I felt like a man finally choosing it. And as the night settled around me, I realized something quietly powerful. My life was no longer about recovering what I lost. It was about protecting what I still had. My dignity, my clarity, and my peace. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is not fight back, but walk forward. And with that choice made, the road ahead was no longer something to fear, but something to shape. With my past finally placed behind me, I was ready to build a future that did not depend on forgiveness from others, but on kindness toward myself. I found the little house by accident, a small wooden cabin near a lake about 40 miles outside the city. 1 bedroom, a narrow porch, water that reflected the sky like a mirror. It was nothing like the home I had lost, and somehow that made it perfect. In the mornings, I woke to birds instead of deadlines. The smell of coffee replaced the scent of cement and paperwork. I sat on the porch with a worn chair and watched the sun rise over the water. For the first time in years, my life moved at a pace my heart could follow. I started volunteering at a local community workshop, young men learning carpentry, retired folks fixing furniture for families who could not afford new ones. My hands remembered what my soul needed: wood, tools, honest labor, purpose without pressure. They didn't know my past. They didn't care about titles or failures. They only saw a man willing to help. Slowly, friendships formed. Tom, a former mechanic who lost his wife. Grace, a widow who baked too much and shared everything. People who had been broken,
and still chose kindness. We talked about weather, memories, regrets, and hope. No one asked what I owned, only who I was becoming. Some nights the pain returned quietly, thoughts of Daniel, of what could have been. But it no longer ruled me. Healing did not mean forgetting. It meant learning how to carry love without letting it wound me. I wasn't rich, but I was calm, and calm felt like wealth. Sitting by the lake one evening, I realized something simple and powerful. I had not lost my life when everything collapsed. I had finally found a version of it that belonged to me. And as the water reflected the fading light, I understood that healing is not loud, it is gentle.
It arrives when we stop chasing who we were and start honoring who we are. With peace returning to my days and clarity settling into my heart, I finally understood the lessons this journey had been trying to teach me all along. Looking back, I understand something I once confused for a long time. Money can rebuild houses, but it cannot rebuild character. It can buy comfort, silence, even obedience, but it can never buy integrity. That comes only from how a person chooses to act when no one is watching. I also learned that family is not defined by blood alone. Real family is built on respect, on honesty, and on the willingness to stand beside one another when it is inconvenient. Where there is no respect, there is no true bond, only obligation disguised as love. Forgiveness, I discovered, does not mean allowing harm to continue. It does not require forgetting pain or reopening wounds. Forgiveness is simply choosing peace over resentment while still protecting your boundaries. You can release anger without surrendering your dignity. And dignity, that is the quiet strength that grows more important with age. When careers end, titles fade, and applause disappears, dignity remains. It becomes the final proof of who you truly are. I lost my business. I lost my home. But I did not lose myself. In the end, the greatest wealth a man can carry into old age is not money nor recognition, but self-respect. And when you walk with dignity, no door ever truly closes behind you. It simply guides you toward the life you were meant to live.